There is a curse on the slow grey waters of the Danube. The Scourge of God paid his toll here. I discovered it was not a curse, but a receipt. It began not with a sword or a coin, but with a tooth. A human molar found by an amateur archaeologist sifting the gravel banks of the river near the Hungarian town of Zob. It was stuck fast in a lump of river-worn iron, the rusted remains of a Roman cavalry bit. The finder, thinking it morbid, donated it to a small regional museum where it sat for a decade. A young bioarchaeologist running isotope tests on old inventory made the connection. The tooth was from a male of Central Asian steppe origin. The iron bit was of a specific Hun design from the mid-5th century, and wedged between the tooth and the iron, preserved by corrosion, was a fragment of oiled leather. On it, burned with a hot needle, was a line of Gothic runes. Heavy is the gold of shame. It rests where the iron horse drowned, at the ford of the Weeping Willow, under the eye of the stone eagle. The local historians knew the folklore. In 452 AD, after his disastrous Italian campaign and the aborted march on Rome, Attila the Hun retreated north across the Julian Alps, his wagons laden with the immense tribute gold paid by the Emperor Valentinian III to leave Italy. The story goes that while fording a swollen tributary of the Danube, a wagon carrying the tribute of shame broke an axle and sank. In the frantic retreat, it was left behind. The hunt for the $50 million in Roman imperial tribute gold had begun. Clue 1, the ford of the Weeping Willow. The iron horse was a Hun wagon. The Danube has 1,000 fords, but the clue specified a tributary. The Weeping Willow was key. Salix babylonica was not native to the region in Attila's time. It was an imported poetic image, but in Old Hungarian toponymy, fuzfa, willow tree, is a commonplace name. Cross-referencing 5th century hydrological maps with known Hun crossing points and modern fuzfa locations, we pinpointed a likely spot, where the Ipoli River, a Danube tributary marking the modern Slovak-Hungarian border, meets the main channel. A small island there was still called Arany Sziget, Gold Island, in folklore. We conducted a submerged magnetic survey of the riverbed around the island. The signals were chaotic, modern debris, wartime wreckage, but one large, rectangular magnetic anomaly, buried under 3 meters of silt and gravel near the island's northern tip, stood out. It was the right size for a wagon. Marine archaeologists used a water dredge to carefully clear the silt. They uncovered not a wagon, but a herma, a square stone pillar with a carved head on top. It was a Roman boundary marker, repurposed. The head was not of a god, but of a Hun warrior, crudely carved over a likeness of Mercury. This was a marker. On its base was a Gothic inscription, this time in Latin letters: Hic pondus auri depositum est, quaerit, in alto sub aquila, quae non volat. Here the weight of gold was deposited, seek on high under the eagle that does not fly. Clue 2, the eagle that does not fly. The stone pillar was a signpost. On high meant away from the river, on higher ground. The eagle that does not fly could be a Roman legionary standard, aquila, but those were carried, they flew. A stone eagle? A carved eagle? We scanned the bluffs overlooking the ford. Using LiDAR, we stripped away the forest canopy. On a sheer limestone cliff face, 200 feet above the river, the scan revealed a pattern, a series of artificial narrow ledges and small cave mouths, one of which was shaped, when viewed from directly opposite, like a crude angular eagle with outspread wings. It was a natural rock formation subtly enhanced by human tools. The cave was inaccessible without climbing gear. Inside, it was a shallow shelter, not a deep cavern. But on the rear wall was a magnificent, ancient piece of graffiti, a painted Hun warrior on horseback, in the distinctive animal style, lancing a Roman soldier. The paint was made from ochre and animal fat. In the horse's eye, the artist had embedded a single, small gold solidus of Emperor Theodosius II. The coin was a message. It was also a key. The reverse showed Constantinople's personification holding a globe. The globe was depicted with a tiny, precise incuse mark, a dent made by a sharp point. We made a silicone impression of the coin. The incuse mark was not damage. It was a deliberate microscopic map. It showed the confluence of two rivers and a dot on the southern bank. It was a scale model of the very landscape below us, with the dot positioned not on the cliff but halfway down, on a scree-covered slope that seemed featureless. Clue 3. The weight of the earth. Here the weight of gold was deposited. The clue was literal. The gold wasn't in the river, it was buried in the weight, the mass of the cliff itself. The dot on the coin map corresponded to a section of the slope covered in a recent landslide. We used seismic refraction tomography to see into the slope. The data showed a distinct, low-density void about 15 feet deep, behind a wall of tumbled boulders. It was not a cave, it was a constructed chamber lined with wood. Excavating was perilous, requiring shoring up the unstable slope. After days of work, we broke through into darkness. The smell was not of earth, but of old, dry wood and cold stone. Our lights illuminated a sight frozen in panic. The chamber was the size of a small room. In the center lay the shattered remains of a massive iron-rimmed Hun wagon, its oxen yoke still attached. It had not rolled here. It had been dismantled and hidden. And around it, stacked with brutal efficiency, were the payloads of empire. Clue 4. The tribute of shame. There were no chests. The gold was stored in the most practical way for rapid loading and unloading, in heavy, stout leather sacks, now desiccated to a horn-like consistency, dozens of them. We opened one carefully. A cascade of gold solidi poured out, shimmering in the light. Every coin was Roman, minted between 425 and 450 AD from the reigns of Theodosius II and Valentinian III. This was the tribute, paid in fresh imperial coin. Another sack held gold ingots of a different sort, Hunnic. These were melted down Roman and Gothic jewelry and artifacts, recast into rough rectangular bars stamped with the clan mark of Attila's house, a stylized bow and arrow. This was loot, consolidated, but the most telling find was at the back of the chamber. A small, personal chest. Inside was a magnificent gold torque, too large for a neck, meant to be worn on the chest or as a horse ornament. Its terminals were fashioned into the shapes of snarling wolf heads. Wrapped around it was a silk ribbon, and on it, written in Greek, the diplomatic language of the era, was a single line. To the King of the Huns, from Rome, in earnest of peace. May it be heavier than his pride. It was the covering note for the tribute, a final, biting insult from the Roman court. This was no accidental loss. This was a deliberate cache. Attila, smarting from the humiliation of taking Roman gold to withdraw, could not bear to bring it all back to his capital. To his warriors, it was proof of a payoff, not a victory. He ordered a portion, perhaps a third, buried at the frontier, a strategic reserve for a future invasion, or an emergency fund should his own people turn on him. The sinking wagon story was a cover, propagated by the guards who sealed this chamber, and likely took the secret to their graves. The Scourge's savings account. The Hungarian National Museum and the European Union's Cultural Directorate were brought in. The gold was of immense historical significance, a direct, datable snapshot of the wealth that flowed from a crumbling Rome to its most feared enemy. By count, there were over 25,000 gold solidi, each worth a minimum of $1,500 for its gold content and historical value, totaling over $37 million. The Hunnic ingots and the wolf torque added another $10 to $15 million in intrinsic and artistic value. The official, conservative valuation for the hoard was set at $50 million. The gold is property of the Hungarian state, destined for the National Museum. My team and the original finder received a substantial finder's fee and permanent academic access. The true discovery was the insight into Attila's psychology. He was not just a mindless destroyer, he was a king entangled in the diplomacy he despised. He buried the evidence of his shameful deal, but he buried it as future power. He turned Roman wealth into a seed of Hunnic ambition, planted in the border soil. For 15 centuries, the weight of that gold pressed down on the limestone, as the Danube carved its path below. The river, which carried the armies of ages, kept the secret of the one king who made Rome pay, then hid the price out of pride until a tooth in a rusted bit and a historian who believed a river's curse was a clue finally followed the trail. The Scourge of God paid his toll, and the receipt was finally cashed.